Okay, so let's give it a shot again. So engineering, right? This happens in this building, and as I noticed, well, as I said before, the engineering building, you have a possibility to do two types of activities. You can do either engineering, sort of indicated by this tank, which is a bit, well, not fairly finished, or you can do the reverse engineering, and then you can see that this is actually a Renault type standing in the British building, so that's the reverse one. And in the engineering, what you do, you modify the default components to your liking. So you can do it in two ways. Again, this is not even pre-alpha, this is just a work in progress, so I can only show some parts. Let's say we start with a hull. So this is our Mark 1 hull. The first thing that you can do, you can use the slots that are reserved for the modification. So we go to the modification mode. And here you see that we have currently, well, 3 modifications. So let's go ahead and introduce them into our hull. What's worth to notice here is that each of the component will have limited number of slots for the modifications. And modifications, they will come in different sort of types. So these icons are just placeholders for the second. But let's say for the hull, you'll have modification of the protection type, of crew type, maybe auxiliary type. So they will have to match. If you have an empty slot, it also has a type, and it will have to match to what you currently have available. And when you insert the modification, it also reflects in your attributes. The second type of engineering that is currently not implemented, but that is intended for, it's called technologies. So they will work in the very same fashion as modification. So assume that this, let's say, button will be split in half, and you have modification on one side, technologies on another side. And then by picking up the right technology, that can be, let's say, riveted armor, tier 1, or sloped armor, when you pick it up, it opens for editing a certain group of attributes of your component. So let's say if you pick up the riveted armor, you can modify, let's say, the thickness of your armor plating in given limits. If you pick up the technology of, let's say, sloped armor, tier 1, we can also do that, but now for the angle for the given projection. And that will also, depending on what technology you choose, it will also affect, of course, the cost in both the materials and in the man hours that you need to produce the component. So that's the engineering.
Just one other question that I think a couple people would at least ask. For these modifications, so you said it's modifications and technologies, right?
Yeah.
That you'll be splitting it into. Do you have like a selected number of both, or do you have to pick between the two?
You will have a certain number of slots for the modifications and a certain number of slots for technologies. And that will depend on the component. So we want to give it, you might open a certain hull, which initially its attributes might be not that really cool, but it will have, let's say, 4 or 5 slots for the modifications. So it will have a much more potential for the upgrade with the different modifications or technologies. And as an alternative, you can open another hull that has a pretty good load with the attributes from the beginning, but it might have only 1 or 2 available slots for the modifications. So that's sort of the alternatives that we want to introduce. And then it's for the player to choose, does he or she want to have a hull that is good now, but has a very limited potential in the future when more powerful modifications will surface out? Or instead, he wants to have something that is, updatable in the future. All right. And then the design. So the design happens in this building. Again, it's the same sort of the same mechanism that when you improve the building or different functionality of the building, it will be reflected in some visuals that you'll see. So for the design, we go here. This tank is for something else. It has seen its better days, as you can see. We go for the new one, and you can see we have a couple of designs already done. Another one sort of in progress, but let's start from scratch. So we pick up a hull. It's the very same one that we were playing with in the engineering window so far. And you can see when I pick the hull, then the attributes, the total attributes of the tank, they start to fill in. So we have quite a lot of attributes, but most likely we'll introduce more of them because, well, it's clearly there's a demand for more refined features, especially when it comes to the protection, to the mobility. So the base element in the design is the hull. It's the hull that defines compatibility with sort of other elements, so to say. Next thing in line will be what we call mover. Some people call it running gear. So in this case, we take the centipede. There we go. Again, for the mover, you can go the very same engineering process as before. So you can plug in other modifications and use the technologies. That's the idea. Then we supplement with the male sponsons. Okay. And you can see when I do this, it reflects directly here. So at the moment, for example, the protection readings for the turret, they are 0. As soon as I do this, well, there we go. Again, another simplification that we have in this work in progress build is that when I pick up the sponson, you see it feels both of them on both sides. In the long run, of course, you'll be able to pick up, let's say, this anchor point and choose, let's say, the male sponson, and then for the other side, let's say you choose to have the female one. So there will be a variation. You'll be able to do that as well. And yeah, the same will go for the guns. So let's take this one. And we have only one slot for the machine gun, so for the central one. So let's take the use that I have. So it's a fairly simple process, but assuming that you have done some work in engineering, you get quite multiple variations to choose from. In the same way, one would go with engine, transmission, suspension. Well, suspension, not so much suspension for this one. And yeah, there you go. So if one is happy with the design, then you go assign the stuff for the actual process, and you have your eater. And yeah, it's also worth to say that both the design process and the engineering process, and also the like with the research, I mean, it will take time. So it's not like you can design a tank and click done and you have this design available. It will have a certain cost in terms of the stuff and maybe sometimes material to actually do the design, to actually assemble it. So the player will have to think really if this is worth to start, or maybe one should wait for other components to appear.
All right.
So that's what we have as a small update so far, but I think it was sort of important to show that sort of the base window, how the engineering and the design will work in the game.
Oh, definitely. It's quite interesting to see, especially considering you're saying this is very early on in development. Like, you wouldn't even consider this an alpha yet, and you already have...
No.
I mean, it's not even playable, obviously, but like, you could very much see how this will be a playable game within not that long, realistically speaking. Like, you have a very good baseline there, and you're making incredible progress for not even having started the Kickstarter yet. So,
well, that's the aim. That's impressive. The aim. We'll try to do as much as we can before the Kickstarter. Another focus right now lies on sort of switching in the other buildings that you can see here: the production hall, the warehouse where you do the logistics and the administration. And also we're working on introducing more models, bringing more models into the game. So then we'll be actually we can really start playing. Let's say take the hull from Mark 1, but take the mover and suspension from A7V and see how that thing works. Right? I mean, well, it sounds a bit bizarre, but it can be fun. Or yeah,
Oh
or
yeah,
start
definitely.
playing with the, different components of the Mark series because if you take the sort of Mark 1, say Mark 5, Mark 4, the Tadpole, and the Mark 8, the International, you can also try to play with their counterparts and see what you can come up with. So that's the current focus at the moment, and also to make the analytics, to make analytics really look appealing and at the same time interesting for the player. So these are the focus that we have at the moment.
All right, I got one other thing that I'm just thinking, just looking at sort of how you have everything set up right now. Do you plan to have like you've got that loading area for the train, you've got all like the tanks sitting out next to, I'm assuming that's the production facility, and then you've got like the little testing facility of them rolling around. Do you plan to have those actually be representative of what the player produces at some point, or do you just kind of have them as placeholders?
Well, we plan for this sort of view to be updated with time, yes. But if, let's say, these
Mm-hmm.
tanks will change depending on what player is designing, well, that depends how we will end up with the implementation of this complete window. Because I think one of the guys actually noticed that in the YouTube. This picture is pre-rendered, but you have 3D objects moving there, right? And
Yep.
you have the particle effect, so um, it looks pretty good together, I would say. If we choose to go for the complete 3D scene, then we have a possibility to actually change what you've seen to what the player is designing. But not if it is a pre-rendered scene. Then it becomes a bit more complicated to do.
Mm-hmm.
But
All
anyhow,
right.
either way, if it is a pre-rendered or if it will be a fully 3D, we plan to visually at least mark what nation you play, also in which time period you're currently at. So that will be changing.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that's about all the questions that I can think of. So I think that would pretty much finish off, unless you had anything else that you want to show.
No, I think that's it for now. It's a sort of shorter update than the last one, but I think, design and engineering, that's a key feature. So we were really eager to show what we have as soon as possible.
Oh yeah, I'm sure a lot of people will be eager to see what you've done too, because this is a huge step up from what we showed last time, which was just kind of the bare minimum, showing that the game was being started. This is showing that you have a workable base for the game already, and you're making very quick progress. So
Thank you. Thank you. We'll try to pace it the same way in the future as well.
and obviously, if nobody's seen the new trailer, you guys just uploaded one, and you guys have. I'll try to link everything so that they can find you in the description, as well as like your Discord and everything. Which that's also being worked on. I'm sure we'll get there.
Perfect. 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 Thanks a lot for today. Thank you. And it was a pleasure
Yep.
to show it. And I hope we get some more interesting questions and suggestions. These are always welcome.